Okay, so I am here with Marjorie Adam, a good friend of mine and a realtor from Nest Realty in Charlottesville, Virginia. And she has so graciously said she's going to jump on a Zoom with me because the first thing that I thought of this weekend when I started to get calls from clients and from agents was, I know Marjorie's been working on this for months. She is not going to be caught surprised. She's got a plan. She's got things that are in place already because this was potentially coming. So Marjorie, really quick, give us a very brief overview or explanation of just the NAR lawsuit and what happened on Friday, March 15th that put everyone in a tizzy.
Yeah, the world
in a tizzy.
The world is freaking out. So right now we're kind of dealing with chaos and confusion, which makes sense, but it doesn't. So let's go through this. So we all know the lawsuits have been going on. The lawsuits were against the National Association of Realtors, which is NAR. There were also suits against RE/MAX and Anywhere and Keller Williams. And so these were commission lawsuits, right? And the biggest thing at stake was that so the National Association, think of the mothership, like the National Association, sort of like the mothership of realtors, and they either own or operate most of the MLS systems in the United States. Now, some companies have their own, they're independent ones, but NAR was sued in this respect. The bigger brokerages were sued because if you think about it, 40% more of the realtors across the country were in these larger brokerages. So it was the National Association of Realtors and these brokerages. And the biggest thing that came to question was the NAR clear cooperation rule. So that rule was what was really the center of these lawsuits, which was that twofold. One, if you had a listing and a listing agreement, the listing had to be put within the MLS, whatever MLS, within 24 hours. And second, there had to be an offer of cooperation or compensation to the buyer's agent as part of that. Okay. So that was found to be antitrust, non-competitive, inflated commissions, all of the things. So we're not going to get into all of that, but what we will get into is several of the other companies settled and the National Association of Realtors didn't. So there was a lot of judgment, we're going to call it, against NAR to not settle. Now, I'm not an attorney, so let's start with this. I'm not an attorney. I am not working for NAR. I do not know what's happened. I wasn't in any closed door conversation rooms. So I am working on the knowledge I have, lawyers I've listened to, many podcasts, many classes, many months of hours. But if we think about this, NAR has now settled. So by settling, right, what has happened if this goes through, right? We have settled, but it still has to be approved by the courts, right? So if this happens, 1 million of the realtors under the umbrella of the Association of Realtors will be part of this blanket settlement. So there are 1.5 million approximately realtors that are actual realtors, not just real estate agents affiliated with NAR. So about 500,000 of them would not be covered by this. Now, there's a couple of reasons. One, they, of course, could be part of RE/MAX, Anywhere, Keller Williams. So they've already been part of those blanket settlements. Two, if there were brokerages that are members that had more than 2 billion in transactional volume, they were not allowed to be part of the suit. We are sure that is because the plaintiffs didn't allow it. I don't have all that information, but right now, 1 million realtors. Okay, so we do know from their own communications, by the way, this is from NAR's communications as well. They did want to have everyone under this release. They were not able to do so. There are provisions, even for these larger companies, there are mechanisms to allow them to settle as well. So the 2 billion plus companies. So, okay. So everyone's a little bit freaking out. Some people mad, some people not mad. Some people say, why didn't they settle earlier? Look, we don't know the interworkings of this unless you're in there, right? So let's just work with what we know. Now, what we know could evolve, right? So this is what we know as of today from Friday. Now, settlements could evolve. The Department of Justice could get more involved. So let's just talk about what we know. So what's interesting? So what we know, the biggest change is that NAR has agreed that there will no longer be cooperation and compensation to a buyer's agent in the MLS. So that means that the field that's in the MLS that is I as a realtor, if I go up, look up 123 Main Street and I get all those details and I look on the field that was there, which was the buyer agency field, that is no longer going to be part of the MLS. That is what's really clear. Number one.
Yeah.
Number two, which to me is no change. So number two is that while we were supposed to use buyer agency agreements for years, while that was good practice,
Yeah.
in our office required, much of the country did not have to use a written buyer agency agreement, right? And so now you have to enter into a written buyer agency agreement before you show property to buyers. Okay.
Before you show any property.
Correct. So for the buyers agents that didn't do this before, we're going to really call these now more buyer representation agreements. That's what they are. We used to call them buyer agency agreements. What they are is buyer representation agreements. Okay. So those agreements have to be very clear on fees, right? That the realtor will get, how they work with their buyer client, and the expectations that buyer client has to have. So let's just take one little pause. So for this, the change, frankly, is no more compensation in the MLS. For everyone that's sort of freaking out about the must get a buyer agency agreement signed, we've been doing that for years. So anyone who hasn't been, it's a bigger shock and change for them. Now, the fact that the offer of compensation isn't clear anymore is the big shift, right? So let's say in theory, I'm working with buyer Sue and I want to go show 5 houses. Now this is all going to take effect mid-July, they say. So right now, today, I don't think we're going to see massive changes in terms of those compensation fields, but they're going to be removed.
Yeah.
So in theory, come July, because remember, this hasn't happened yet, but it's happened, but hasn't happened. So in theory, come mid-July, if I want to show 5 houses, I, as Sue, theoretical Sue's buyer agent, am going to have to call each of these listing agents and ask if there's compensation being offered, right? That's very different than right now where I can just look in there. There are a lot of rules in the clarities of fees too that are going to be coming around. So when I sit with buyer Sue and say, this is what I'm doing, this is my compensation, I can't accept a fee higher than one I've agreed. So I'm going to use chickens. We are not going to use percents. We're not going to talk percents. Again, I'm not an attorney and I'm also not going to get in trouble. So let's say that you're Sue now. And I say, Sue, to work with me, I would like to have 2.5 chickens or 2 chickens or 3 chickens, however it is that we work. So
Sure.
let's say you and I agree it's 2. I'm not saying, I'm just using a number.
Yeah.
If 3 chickens are offered through the seller, I have to work for 2. I am not allowed to collect more than my agreement states, right? Even if the offer is higher. So there's a lot that I think is going to be confusing, yet needs to be cleared up. So the settlement is $418 million. They're going to pay it over 4 years. They've stated very clearly that the membership dues for 2024 will not change. What that doesn't say is what will the dues change for the years coming. Now, I'm a betting person and I'm betting that the dues are going to go up. Now, nobody's told me this. It's just logic seems to say that I got to find $418 million somewhere. I probably don't just have it in my backyard. So some fees probably need to go up. So right now it's a proposed settlement. I believe, and many people believe, it will go through. And there are certainly copycat settlements or buyers that have sued. Those cases are much weaker than these. I am not an attorney, but we'll see what happens with those. But that's really where we are. So I think whatever needs to be clear on. So every news article, so I literally kind of consolidated. So of course Friday comes and I'm like, ooh, I wasn't surprised. I didn't know when NAR would settle. I assumed they would settle. I think that there's many reasons they have to settle. One is it kind of stops it, right? Like if we don't settle, it continues. And I believe that the NAR was working to get as many realtors under the umbrella of this lawsuit as possible, right? So that they could cover as many people from copycat suits, additional suits. Again, I don't know this. I'm going to take the faith that that is the case. But since we don't know, anyone saying, oh, NAR did right or did wrong or is weak or is strong, you know what? We don't know what we don't know. The fact that this is settled, I think, is a good thing because this continues to cause confusion. Even people who've been following it, frankly, the public is more confused than anyone. Even my own family members are calling me, and I'm like, nah, that's not what it says. So I think we have to be clear in what this means, right? So it is going to be, is it going to be a shift? Yes. It's going to be a shift in the way that you need to explain, if you haven't, to your clients. So if you haven't sat with your seller clients, now I'm speaking as a realtor here. I'm a realtor. I'm not speaking for all the realtors. Let's be clear. Also, again, not an attorney, in case we forgot. But as Marjorie Realtor, I've always sat with my clients and said, look, these are the services that I provide. This is my fee. So let's all be clear, because a lot of what all the headlines are, the 6% commission is gone. I'm using the number percent and 6 because it's a headline. We're going to go back to chickens. But the fact is, and some really different things that I'm hearing that I'm like, that's not correct. Commissions, number one, have always been negotiable, always. So let's be clear. You can sell your home on your own. And in our area for at least 20 years now, this is not new, you could have entered into the MLS for $500. So even when we talk about whatever it is, if you paid $500 to X company.y, I don't know who it is, you could have been in the MLS and it said contact seller. You could have paid $1,000. You could have paid $29.95. You could have paid whatever. There's always been many compensation models. So when I read the articles now that say, oh, so now they'll be negotiable. No, they've always been negotiable. Every meeting I've ever had, if someone said, will you drastically cut your commission? I won't. There are companies out there that will. If commission is your number one objective, there's always, right, the benchmark of who you're hiring, there's always been avenues for this, always.
Yes.
So I think when I hear that this X is gone, X is not gone, X is what I'm willing to accept and what a seller's willing to pay. And now as we shift, since they won't be part of the MLS, a big part of the conversation with the buyers, of course, needs to be compensation. I think part of the reason we all got sued as well, the people that used to put out on their websites, hey, buyers, work with me, it's free. That was not true. Now it was quote unquote free because in theory, you didn't hand me the paycheck, right? Like you weren't paying me by the mile or by the hour. By the way, we are not allowed to be paid by the hour because someone said we could go to an hourly pay model. No, we cannot. We cannot be paid as independent contracts per hour. So we will not be billing by the hour because that's one thing I keep hearing. But right now it's this clarity of, it's always been for the ones who haven't been clear. What's this mean? This means that the compensation isn't going to be clearly stated. This means that if you used to go and get a phone call and meet a stranger at a house and not have a consultation, you shouldn't have done it. You're definitely not going to do it now, right? So I think that because this is not only a recommended practice in theory, again, per our office, a required practice, it is required. So if you look at it that way, there's got to be a written agreement before you do anything. You have to understand that you have to be able to explain your value. Now, will some buyers here's the confusion, right? How will these realtors get paid? Well, so sellers, let's be clear. I think another mistake people are making is that sellers cannot pay a buyer's agent. Yes, they can. There is nothing stopping a seller, a home seller at this time. Now, whether anything shifts in the future, there is no ruling, no part of this settlement says that a seller cannot pay a buyer's agent just like they used to. So in your agreement, when you sell your house, you can absolutely offer to pay X chickens to a buyer's agent. It's just not going to be a field in the MLS. So that's number one. The sellers can still pay. Obviously, it's negotiable. Frankly, it was before. Now, some sellers may opt not to pay. And I think that, look, everyone's going to say, oh, she's a realtor. She feels that way. I think that's a grave error because I haven't done this for almost 30 years. I'm very clear when I represent my seller client, the value of a strong buyer's agent. And if you've sold enough houses and you get a really good buyer's agent that is taking control of that process and actually, frankly, you work with the other agent, not against them. It doesn't have to be this combative right? Everyone's like, oh, I got to fight for this. And it's like, no, you don't. You have to represent your client. But the goal is if that buyer really wants to buy the house and the seller really wants to sell the house, the goal is to get to closing where both parties are taken care of, right?
Right.
So So I think what I've been reading that's kind of disturbed me is, I'm seeing, oh, well, now no longer will the seller's agent commission be part of MLS. Well, that's never been. So I think the problem here to me is, and I'm not trying to attack news media. I graduated in photojournalism. So by the way, I worked at a small paper. Woo. But here's the point. Because in one of the CNN articles said sellers won't even be allowed to say how much they're paying their own agents in MLS. They don't now. So I think the problem is you've got a lot of news
Yes,
and it's a change and people are scared about it, but you have people writing things. You have journalists who aren't realtors, who aren't talking to realtors, who will say things like, now even the listing agent fees aren't going to be disclosed. Well, they are in the listing agreement. They never have been in the MLS. You won't be required to pay a buyer's agent. Just so we're clear, the compensation policy could have been you'll pay them $1 or 5,000 or 2 or 6 chickens or whatever you want, but it
right.
was not a percentage requirement. So I think some of these, because it says under the new rules you can negotiate, under the old rules you can negotiate. So I think there are some misnomers in kind of the things that I'm reading. And then of course, people call me, they're like, we don't have to pay the realtors anymore. It's like, what? I don't think suddenly the realtors are going to not work. We're not all of a sudden all going to provide free services. Now, what will this create? I
Yeah.
think you will have, I think as this evolves, are we going to have realtors that leave? Probably. And maybe it's just too much change. I think change is hard for anyone.
Yeah.
But I think right now, if we want to be as clear as possible, it's being clear on the value you provide to your client, tangible value and expertise and negotiation skills and all those things, frankly, that should have been part of a consultation we were doing anyway, that we have to demonstrate more clearly.
So when you say at this point, you have to have an agreement set before you can show a house or meet a buyer at a house. There are lots of agents that maybe do online leads, and that's how they kind of capture them, right? Is let's meet at this house and let me show it to you without anything else being set up. What changes for them? Are they no longer able to meet at that house and show them that house? Do they now have to have an agreement in place? Or, if they do show the house before the agreement, then is that house excluded? Like, what are the changes there? Or maybe what are just the best practices that should be happening, knowing that this is passed but not completely done?
Well, I will say the word of this. So NAR, I'm going to say 2 months ago, please don't quote me because I got to look back. Because as you know, time bends, right? Like, especially as you get older, you're like, wow, that was 2 years ago. Let's say 2 months ago ish. NAR had already agreed to remove the requirement. Now, the field didn't go anywhere, but the requirement to pay the buyer's agent was no longer part of going into MLS. So we've already seen some shifting. We've seen some X dollars, we've seen X percents, we've seen different things, but frankly, that was kind of how it was anyway, I'll argue. But so I think already in the last few months, people should have, who were not making this part of the practice, realized that if you haven't had a real clear conversation of what you're being compensated and you're just going to show up at a house, you're going to have a problem because one, you aren't really this buyer's agent, right? There is no agency
No
right now.
contract yet.
Yeah, there is no contractual agreement for me to work with you. And so someone that's just, I'm going to go see this house at 1, at 2, and 3, and I don't want representation. Cool. So they're an unrepresented buyer, right? So I think people got confused just because they showed a buyer, they were the buyer's agent, even realtors, right? It's like, oh, it's my client. It's not your client, right? Just because, they called a phone number and you showed up, they're not your client. So I think there's got to be true clarity. But when I am saying yes, so especially now and moving forward, if you are in the practice of just showing up at a house and going, hey, Lisa, nice to meet you. I'm going to represent you now. Well, what are you going to do? So you and I go in and you're like, I like to buy it. And let's say I now finally wake up and pay attention and there's no offer of compensation. What do I do? So now I'm going to go, oh, Lisa, darn it. Whoopsies, Lisa. So I need you to pay me this many chickens. because I'm representing you. And you're like, what are you talking about? You just let me in this house, right? So I think we've done it backwards. It's worked okay in many cases. I also want you to think, what about, and again, I'm not villainizing any portal. I'm going to pick Zillow just because it's the most known portal. But, you know, if I were one of the Zillow agents paying for leads, I would get filtered leads and then I would owe them, let's say it's 40%. Again, I'm just giving a
Right.
number. Well, how do I pay someone like a portal a portion of a commission that I don't even know I'm going to get because there's no agreement, especially if I don't have an agreement with that client, right? So I think you've got to take this multiple steps forward. So I think, you know, you've got to, whether it's a Zoom, whether it's an in-person component, if you say, hey, I want to see a house, my first question always should have been, are you working with a realtor? No, well, let me take a few minutes and explain this to you. You know, I work as a buyer agent. This is how I work. This is what I'm going to do for you. These are the fees that I charge. This is the agreement we need to make before we go and knock on this door. And if you're like, I'm not interested, I'm not paying, you know, you're going to find these things out. But this, you have to be, it's a proactive, not reactive. It always has been. For those who haven't been, it's time. You've got to be.
So what do you think the message is for realtors that maybe have, you know, kind of done it the average way? Maybe they get Zillow stuff, maybe they do that. What are the steps right now, knowing what we know that isn't in place, but definitely on the horizon? What do you think are the 1, 2, or 3 most impactful steps that they should take right now to ensure how they're going to move forward?
Yeah, and I think it's two sides, right? I think there's a lot of education first on ourselves. So if you're a realtor, and you have, look, I've been talking about this, I'm going to say a year. It's been a long time since, I mean, I would reach out to people and they're like, oh, that'll never happen. Or, and I'm like, oh, it's happening. It's not like the, you know, it's out, people. So I think if you haven't really, if you can't sit with a client or friend or whoever, if I can't call you and say, here's what's happening, here's the basis of the suits, by the way, do we even know why? Like most people, do they know why the seller paid the commission? You need to know that. There's a history and an involvement and where buyer's agency came from. There's many things that we have to be able to explain, right? And that this is where these suits are now. There's still a lot of unknowns. The change is written agreement, no longer compensation offered in the MLS. Doesn't mean no one's getting paid anymore. Doesn't mean that I have to change my strategy on what I want to be paid. But it sure means that if I'm going to sit with you now, the seller, Lisa, and I'm going to have a meeting with you, I need to explain the value of my services representing you. I need to explain to you the value that I see in a buyer's agent and why I believe a buyer's agent should be compensated. Now, they can choose to do what they want. But frankly, I am a strong believer because I've had too many cases go where there's no buyer's agent or a poor buyer's agent, and it's been a disaster. And so I can tell you in my own thousands of sales why I understand the value and I need to articulate that and my opinion and the strategy and my you know, my pricing strategy, my marketing strategy, my negotiation strategy on why I think there's value in that. They get to ultimately decide. It's my job to support that, even on the listing side, right? Because I feel that strongly about it, for representation for both sides. Now, when I'm working with a buyer, so if you're buyer Lisa now, I need to explain to you, what does this mean? And by the way, how are we going to structure offers so that you don't have to compensate me out of your pocket? And how I'm going to work on that and what my strategy is going to be for that. But also, what's the value I provide to you, right? Because I think that over the years, I mean, the internet's a fantastic thing. And a lot of people, what I'll hear is even people I know really well will be like, well, my realtor didn't even find me the house. Well, if you're working with a realtor just to find a house, then you're right. If that's the value you see, then you don't need a realtor because the internet and Google Maps and everything else can find you a house, right? Like the internet changed that 20 years ago. My job is to not only get you into that house or get you out of that house if we realize you should not buy that house. So my job is to be able to negotiate if we're in a competing offer situation to get you to win because there's a sure strategy there, but to protect you at the same time, right? My job is to know this neighborhood and this area that I've lived in for my whole life and to be able to articulate to you, this is a great home to buy, this is not. This is how we get this done. These are inspection you needs. And here's the services I offer to make your life easier, right? That's my job. So I always laugh when people are like, well, I found the house. Well, good, right? Like that honestly is the smallest part of my job. It's just like when people say, well, the listing agent just put the sign in the yard. Yes. All for 29 years, I just drive around and I just put signs. It's really awesome, Lisa. I have really nice signs and I just stick them in yards and then I just go home and then I hope something happens. I mean, it's the same sort of thing, right? So, but here's the thing, the people that didn't see the value in a realtor before won't now. I think the people that did will, but should have expectations of services that are being paid for as they should. It's the same thing as when I've looked over the years and I see someone's listing in MLS and it's got horrible photos and laundry on the bed. And like there was one today, I was like, this guy had to be high because there was like 30 pictures and it was 5 times the same, right? It was like 5 times the left side. And I was like, am I having a stroke? Nope, it's the listing, right? I'm sorry, they should expect better, right? So
Yeah.
there, you know what I'm saying? So I think there should be a heightened expectation. If this means that we have to articulate our services and provide more value, good, right? That's not a bad thing.
It is funny that you say that because I was talking to someone this morning who I think is relatively a really smart person. And they said the exact same thing. Well, my realtor didn't even find me the house. And I said, I don't think houses are on Zillow, they're on realtor.com, they're on, KW, they're on Redfin, they're everywhere. And
Yeah,
I
it's our
said, but
job. It's
I
our
don't,
job to affiliate. So you get a listing, right? And you put it on the largest marketing platform, which done properly with professional photos and videos and actually correct information and data I need to be able to share with my client recent improvements, utilities. That's our job, right? Is to feed all this information and then to provide that data to the portals. You're going to find the house on the portal. Either I'm going to push it to you or it's going to pull to you, right? So
right, based on the search you've.
correct. And the data that we've given. So that's not my job, right? That's not why
Right.
you need me.
But if there's a relatively smart person in the mortgage business saying, I'm just gonna go to a realtor who can write up a contract for $1,500 because I can find it on realtor.com. The question is then, who negotiates that? Who helps with the inspection? Who sends over the inspector? Who reviews the inspection? Who negotiates the inspection? There's a lot more to it, and I think that when we get answers like that, like I'll just get a real estate attorney to do it. Is the real estate attorney going to work on the weekends when offers are being made? Probably not. Is the real estate attorney going to take your call and ask, like, what should I do with this negotiation? Or how should I do this? No. So I think that we're simplifying a lot of things. And sadly, we're simplifying a lot of things for people that are in the business for what a realtor really does. And I think outlining that is really key
But
because
that's our job, right? I mean, I think look, some people want a for sale by owner. Good. Some
do it.
people want a discount agent. Okay. I am not here to say everyone needs a realtor and everyone needs the service level I provide and everyone that doesn't make any sense, right? So like I've never in my career called a for sale by owner ever, because to me, if that's the path you want to take, good on you, right? Like I'm not here to convert someone who wants to do it their way. The issue I have is my question then to that person would be, wow, what level of service, if you really, the complaint is they didn't find the house, which again, to me is quite frankly, the simplest part. Identifying a home to see is not the hard part, right? So, and yes, so let's follow this through. Could someone say I used pick portal number one and I called an attorney and they drafted a contract? Sure. Cool. Now the attorney's not going to set up inspections and set up termites and negotiate those things and help you through your HOA packet. And like, they can't, that's not what they do. Like there are pieces and parts. What we've started sort of done is taken X, if finding the home is 10%. So 10% is there. If the attorney can write the contract and that's 15%. So now I've got two entities. What about the other 70% or whatever math is left to get you to closing? They're not going to go attend the inspection with you. They're not doing the final walkthrough with you. They're not gathering the receipts for you. They're not setting up the contractors for you, right? They're not helping you with the movers. And if someone says, well, no one's ever done that for me, then maybe it's a level of service that you need and then you pay for it versus, you know what I mean? So I think, look, what I think this will do, there be greater variety in services? Yes. And actually, there always should have been. If you're going to pay, frankly, X chickens, one chicken versus 6 chickens. Again, I'm not even trying to use percents, but if I'm going to do this for 1 chicken, then you should get 1 chicken service.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
if I'm going to do this for 6 chickens, you should get stellar 6 chicken service, but you're not going to get 6 chicken service for 1 chicken. You know what I mean? So I
Right.
think if someone just wants a deal, you could always get it. It will always exist and you can do it yourself. You can get a book and God help you, you'll figure it out. But you know what I'm saying? So I think the thing is for those people who value and understand the full spectrum of service that is offered, that is beneficial if they want it, then that is what we're here for, right? So to me, it's like right now, the real estate industry, every realtor needs to decide, what is my service level? Like,
Yep.
are we just I'm going to say race to the bottom. That sounds insulting, but are we all just going to say, okay, cool, we're all going to be a quarter chicken realtors, right? Like, because that's what's happening. I disagree. It's like I mean, where you shop, like I can get, and this is going to sound mean, but I don't mean it mean. I can get a shirt at Walmart or I can get one at Nordstrom's. And I either see the value in that or I don't, right? So I think it's the same thing. Like if you want true, like concierge level, white glove, hand holding service, and you get it, and it's clear, then you're going to pay for that. And if you think, I don't care about that, I just want to be in the MLS for a quarter chicken, go, right? So I think that's where there's not just this one thing, right? And I think people now are freaking out. And of course, the headlines don't help either. It's like, you don't need to pay your realtor like they made you do before. No one I didn't ever sit in a client's house and say, I'm not leaving until you pay me my chickens, right? Like it was like a conversation. This is what I do, and this is what I offer, and this is what I charge. Okay. And here's a net sheet, and this makes sense. And I feel good about this. Cool. So I think this sort of like, feeling of this just massive conspiracy, I disagree with. Now, of course, people are going to be like, well, she's a realtor. Yes. And I have been for 30 years, and I've never not had someone understand buyer agency, nor have I ever had a non-clear discussion or a full consultation with a client. So I think if people haven't had that, maybe that's part of the problem, right? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So what do you think are the biggest skills that maybe agents who haven't had these discussions in the past or had this kind of setup where they really were able to articulate their value as a buyer's agent, right? Or as a listing agent to why the seller should pay a buyer's agency fee. So what do you think are the skills that they need to not only develop, but maybe what are the things that they need to be thinking about right now to make sure that they are able to maintain different offerings?
So here's the thing. I think like anytime, I think 4 years, chances are, if someone's been a realtor for a long time, and they have systems and they have structure, because that's part of the problem. Like if you're a kind of I wing it and show up how I feel and I'll talk about something, whoopsie, forgot, then you're not a systems oriented realtor already. But if you're a process driven, systems oriented realtor, in the very least, you had a very clear listing process, right? At least like a meeting and a consultation. But for some reason, that was foreign to so many realtors with a buyer, which I don't understand. It's just this other side, right? Like, so
Right.
if you have a structured set listing appointment and you're able to look, if you're competing, which most people do, and you have to articulate your value of why that seller should pick you. It's just the flip side. You have to have dedicated meetings over Zoom or in person that is a set consultation that explains the process and the services you provide and why they should pick you. So if someone can't articulate why they should pick them, that's what they got to be working on. Should have been for their entire career, but that's vital now, right? Because I think if you don't, and it's just fear, then it is a race to the bottom, right? Then it is everyone just, hey, I can't demonstrate that value. I am just that person. That's the key, right? Like I think if realtors are just thought of as a little, like I'm a walking key, which frankly we are quite often, right? If someone calls and says, I'm in front of a house, can you come show it to me right now? Well, no, because I'm there. But if that's the value, right, then the payment's that, right? So I have to be clear on why someone wants to work with me. So what are my negotiation skills? What are the services that I offer? What is it that I bring to the table that is worth the compensation I choose to be paid? And if I can't sit down right now and make that super clear, that's the problem. And so then it will be figuring out how much I have to discount whatever my chosen fee is. Because let's be clear, there is no, just like there wasn't before, what we charge is what we charge, right? So I can charge what I want to charge based on the services that I provide. I can also elect to charge way less and provide way less service. So I guess the time is now to articulate what is it that you're offering and what is the compensation you are seeking. And so again, I don't think it's that much of a change, but for those, especially on the buyer side, who just assumed compensation through MLS and showed up and thought I'll get paid, that's going to be the biggest change in their business.
So at this point with your service level agreements, do you have more a la carte services where like, hey, for this chicken, I will do ABC. For this many chickens, I will do A, B, C, D, E, F. And for all the chickens in the coop, I will do A, B, C, you know what I mean, right? Like,
Yeah. So
here.
I'm basically a full chicken, full service person, right? So I have not delineated because here's the problem for me. The
Mhm.
level of what my team does and our processes and how we do it with, our first meeting to our next meeting to staging and setting up contractors and everything we do in home prep. Some houses, of course, don't need it, some do. And what we do with our drone and our photography and our flyers and our networks and everything we do, you can do that and probably will have to. But the problem is everyone wants to pay fewer chickens for all the chicken service, right? And
Yes.
so there are very few people that say, oh, I don't want this service. They just want to pay less. And so to me, it's like, I can't give you my level of service for way fewer chickens. So if the fewer chickens are the only thing that someone cares about, I'm probably not the realtor, right? Because
Yeah.
if they don't care about my services, then frankly, they maybe don't need to work with me. So if my negotiation skills, if my knowledge of the area, if my market analysis, if my staging consult, if my marketing, my pricing strategy, none of that matters, then you're not seeing the value in what I do. And then I've got to try to strip that down. And I don't know how to do that. So to me, like, right. So if someone says, look, I'm only paying a quarter chicken, whatever that becomes, then I think they got to find a quarter chicken realtor. You know what I mean? Now that doesn't mean that I think let's flip side. So the argument that everyone is saying is that, it was a six chicken industry and no one's going to pay 6 chickens anymore. So the flip side of that is that doesn't mean that you can say, look, it's 6 chickens or nothing, right? Like, because
Right.
as the industry changes, but I think it's, if you continue to want to offer the best service and lead the pack, you better dang well prove why your chickens are worth, my service is worth more chickens. So I think that you can't just rest on your laurels and say, the silly, funny things that, I think we all say we do this, we do in many cases the same things, but it's also going to be harder for someone that's newer, right? If I'm 30 years in and I've negotiated for this long and I take classes all year long and I do, and I teach and I podcast and I have been, learning all I can learn about every service for years, is a very different service level than someone who's done this for 2 months, right? It's going to be a very different curve. So I think it's very much you being very clear on the service you provide. And if you choose to negotiate your chickens, which is everyone's right, it always was, then you got to be clear on that too. So I think there wasn't a runway before, there isn't a one way now, but I think there's always been a little bit of fear. Like as realtors, I feel like a lot of times lack of preparation, service, or clarity in the value we provide. The second a client says, well, what do you charge? It's like someone freaks out and is like, well, I'll do it for as little as you want. And you're like, what? Because my argument would be, crap, the number one thing they want is negotiation, right? Like my negotiation skills
You
in
just
all
went in the
terms.
toilet when
Yeah.
you
And I
like,
just showed you that I can't do that worth a darn. So again, but what does that client want? So I won't be the right realtor for every client that says you only put signs in yards and all you didn't even find the house, because then you're missing everything that I do right? That is vital to getting you into that house. Because I will argue one problem we've all done to ourselves is we have made it look easy. So like if you hired me as your buyer agent and you thought, well, that was easy, that's my job. But what you missed is the 52 beatings I took behind the scenes, and that I was in your house cleaning it up before you got there, and that I had to force them to do this, and I had to show up at the attorney's office, and I had to get my vendor over there. And you have no idea the phone calls I'm taking from an irate other side, or hey, they're just not going to move out. And I'm like, well, that's not going to happen. And all this behind the scenes stuff, right? That I'm sorry they didn't even find me the house person has no idea what happened, because we want to make it such a great experience for you. So I
Right.
think we've sort of hurt ourselves in some ways in being like, that was easy. Meanwhile, we're like 9 knives in our back because it was that hard. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I think there's got to be a balance as well of, hey, I didn't involve, like, I didn't want to freak you out. I want you not sleep at night because you're already stressed out, but what you don't know. Right. So
Right.
I think that's part of it too. We've made it look too easy, versus crawling into our houses at night.
What,
Right.
what would you say? Because I've heard this before, the larger brokerages, like my brokerage won't let me take less than X.
Yeah. So you can't be saying that. So that's actually
Could you
not,
have, oh, but is that
no.
a true
So
statement or not?
well, again, I'm going to say no because we're independent contractors and there is no document I have that says what I have to charge. I do know years and years ago, people would say that all the time, my broker requires this because of my split. The problem is, especially now, I would argue that's not, you can't go somewhere, because that's the whole basis behind this suit, right? Is you can't say you have to, well, again, you have to pay me this as a poor negotiation strategy. So I think if anyone listening has said, I just blamed my brokerage, you've got a problem, because I'm going to crush you. Because what I do is show with my value, not blame. If you're blaming another entity and that you have to charge something, you've got some skills to work on, right? Especially now. So I have to, because someone said so, is not going to fly. Because right now, basically, the whole world has been told we work for free and nobody got to pay nobody, right? And so we got to be like, okay,
Yeah.
that's not the case. But I think, look, what is it that you're really good at? Like, it's time to figure out our superpowers. What are we really good at? What are we really strong at? What makes us different? Why me versus someone else? And I don't mean in a derogatory way. I don't mean like trash your competition. I mean
Yeah.
elevate yourself, right? Like,
Yeah.
this is not time to be you should never talk about them. If they say they're talking to other people, fantastic. They're great. Here's what I do.
Yeah.
Right. It is not like, oh, that person is a, big or, what I mean, whatever. It's like, we got to focus on what we do. And I think I have not a lot of fear about this, because I feel like it was happening. So I can say for months and months and months, we've been talking about this. We knew this was coming. There was no way we were exiting this suit without compensation leaving the MLS. And DOJ wants complete decoupling, right? Where sellers aren't paying at all. That has not happened. But this change was inevitable. So for the last months, anyone who was like, oh, that won't happen, or that would never happen, you know,
Here we are.
sorry. But so it is what it is. So the world hasn't ended. Yes, the industry is changing. Yes, your job is important. Yes, you will still be representing buyers. Yes, you are potentially gonna be negotiating some more commissions, right? It's confusion, it's chaos, it's change. I want you all to think about, though, like any industry, like you guys had Dodd-Frank, 10 years ago? That was a massive shift.
Yeah.
Think about everybody and their mom during COVID, right? Like COVID, you're all locked in. People that couldn't travel had to evolve. So guess what, guys? It's time to evolve in a way that we need to show value that we offer. And if we can't, they will figure something else out. And that's okay. And there's going to be a percentage of people that I'm not here to convert the inconvert, right? It's just like getting in politics arguments with someone who believes the polar opposite that you do. You're not going to have a 5-minute conversation. They're going to go, you know what? You're right. Marjorie, you're so right. My deep held beliefs, I'm going to change them because of this conversation. It's not going to happen. So if the value isn't there, then it's probably not my client. Right. And I think, but I have to be able to articulate. So there's a lot of learning that has to happen right now. I think there's a lot of meeting with fellow realtors and, and being really clear and not I mean, the last couple of years have been tough. I think the next couple will be hard too. No one said this was supposed to be easy. Anyone who got into this, because, so many people are like, oh, it's such easy money, which makes me laugh. It has not gotten to be. I'm 29 years in, and I'm like, really? When's the easy money coming from? Because I work a lot, and I work hard for my clients and show up every day. So the, easy gravy train of simplicity is not this job. And so, it's going to be what it is. I think people need to rise up, and I think they need to learn, and I think they need to be in touch with their clients, and they need to explain properly what the gist of this is. And they need to be able to say, this is how we're evolving, right? And this is what we do. And I think the, fear and stuck is not an option.
Yeah. One last question and then we'll wrap it up with regards to builders.
Oh,
Because, national builders for, I think a long time, if they could cut out an agent, they would. Like some of them have, oh, well, if you showed up at our open house and you didn't have an agent with you, we're gonna cut you out. That's not all of them. That's not even some of the smaller custom ones. But where do you think their concept or their feeling is going to be on this? Because in essence, they are the seller, right?
Yeah.
And
So
so
I
they
think
have the choice to pay or to not pay. And where do you think they will
I think
fall on this?
I think it's the same answer. I think the builders who see value in the realtors and what they're bringing to their business are going to pay a realtor. The big production, they're showing up anyway. I want to cut you out because that's my business model, is going to do that. So I think, but market shifts happen too. Right now, we're in a massive limited inventory market. So there is much more of a, the builder pull is pretty strong, meaning, they have incentives online and someone shows up in the open house, although most of the time they don't even realize. They're like, oh, now I'm under contract. I had a realtor, right? So, but that's also some buyer education, right?
Yep,
That's buyer
yep.
education. Needs to have always been part of the buyer agency agreement, even more now. I think those builders that see no value it's not going to change them. And the ones who are in demographic markets where those realtor partners are vital to their business, right? That they bring them really qualified clients and prove value. Like, I think, look, let's be honest, this probably people won't love me for saying this, but anyone who just showed up on a contract and asked for a commission check at the end of a build has proven to a builder that there is no value, right? So if you have a buyer client and they build a house and your phone call and the only time they ever know who you are is where's my check, then
That's a
that is
problem.
what you've shown to that builder versus, touring the model and going to, writing the contract and attending the selections and going to the pre-construction and the pre-drywall and the final walkthrough and the closing and being involved in all the amendments. I think that there's values. So what have we done? Now, some builders, it's just, this is how we do it, but what part have we had in not showing our value there? So I think it's the same thing, that they're going to do what they're going to do. And then look, the market will shift at some point, and, the thought that buyer's agents are more relevant for some reason, will change, and there's going to be, many more homes on the market. And then potentially the thought is that buyer's agents will be more valuable. I think, look, the people that appreciate what we do will appreciate it. The ones that don't, again, are not going to be converted. But for the ones that have looked for an excuse not to, this is a great one, right?
Yep. Good.
So,
Marjorie, thank you. It's been good to really hear your 2 cents, get the clarity of what this information is saying, what it's not saying, how the headlines are twisting it a little bit. I know I've gotten calls over the weekend from
me too.
clients about, hey, how does this change? Will this make home prices go down? You said earlier,
I
there's
don't
never
see that.
been a
That's a
line
good
item.
point, right? Like, so I think the thing is, like, I keep reading that the cost of buying will go down. Well, in theory, because you're amending commissions, I guess that's that statement, but that homes will get cheaper. Well, that does not make sense to me, because in 29 years, when I've done many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of market analyses, it's never been a line item or an appraisal. Oh, they don't have a realtor. Oh, therefore we reduce the value, or we add to the value if they have 2 realtors. The house is worth what the house is worth. It's the net concessions that deal with the commissions. So we're not all of a sudden making houses X% cheaper, which is the same thing that unrepresented buyers have had this mistake of they'll call me, and this has been for 29 years, and say, well, I don't have a realtor. The house is, I'm going to pay 3% less. No, the seller in that case, especially, was paying the commission, and I have already negotiated that. So there's not a difference in value. Now it works for some people. Some builders do it too, right? Oh, we'll cut them out. We'll give them that. But there's this expectation. And I think now this thought that homes will get cheaper, I don't agree with. Now, again, what happens with concessions, with commissions remains to be seen, but it does not mean that all of a sudden home prices are tumbling in a limited inventory market.
Right. Okay. Marjorie, thank you again for taking the time and again, giving us some clarity on all these things as it kind of ebbs and flows and becomes more clear as more information comes out. But this has been super helpful, as you know, to me and to everyone that watches this. So thank you a bunch.
Thank you for having me.
Anytime.